what's crazy is like at the time, on the outside, it looked like I had everything. I had this celebrity practice in Beverly Hills. I was making good money, driving nice cars, living in a good area. I was a professor at the university. I was teaching on some of the biggest stages. I was publishing in big journals. I really had everything that I wanted, but I was suffering from team challenges. I wasn't a great communicator. I wasn't a great leader. I didn't have the things that I needed, the non-clinical skills that I needed to succeed. I only had the clinical skill. Dentists are 17 times more likely to commit suicide than a non-dentist. We're twice as likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, and panic disorder than a non-dentist. It's hard to like your job when no one likes you for doing it.
Welcome back to another episode of Dental Marketing Theory. I'm your host, Gary Bird. I'm the owner of SMC National, where we help offices just like yours level the playing field against the big guys out there so you can grow the way that you want, but you can't grow if your mindset is not right. And one of the biggest problems in dentistry is dentists are hurting themselves and things aren't going the way that they thought they would in their career, and they got to get their headspace right. And today I have Dr. Kyle Stanley, who's a speaker, a dental tech founder, advisor, and investor. He runs a successful practice. He also co-founded Pearl, and he posts great content on Instagram. And today he's going to break down how he's helped over 2,000 dentists in the dental industry get their mind right so they could be successful in everything that they do. He goes into this very, very in-depth, and this is going to bring a lot of value to you, especially if you're hurting or struggling, or if you know somebody who's hurting or struggling. Help me understand what the problem is in dental and why dentists feel the way that they do at times. You're going to want to stay tuned for this one. All right, we are live. And today I have a guest with a similar beard as me, Dr. Kyle Stanley. And if you don't know him, you probably live under a rock. He's very, very popular, especially on Instagram, but really everywhere. And I came across a post recently that he had that had some notes that dentists were receiving. Basically, what the notes were saying is that people were writing in and telling dentistry is a scam and basically harm yourself. And I know this is such a big issue in dentistry, but it's the one issue that really not a lot of people talk about. And I reached out to Dr. Kyle and I just said, hey, I would love to have you on and have you talk about this because you're the leading expert in this topic and you have courses around this subject around mental health for dentists. And so I would love to just get an understanding. You're a successful dentist. How did you end up going down this road? It probably wasn't part of your plan.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. And, for me, it was February of 2018 that I came home, and it was literally a dark and stormy night. And I remember that because I live in Southern California where there aren't a lot of dark and stormy nights. And I remember the smell of asphalt. I went to my front door and the deadbolt was on. So I knocked on the door. My wife opened the door holding my son, who at the time was 1, and she said, "Welcome home." And I said, "I can't do this anymore." And for anybody that's married, that's not what you want to say to your spouse without some context, because she's kind of going, what are you talking about? Marriage, kids, living together. What do you mean? And I was like, no, dentistry. No, I can't do dentistry anymore. And what's crazy is like at the time, on the outside, it looked like I had everything. I had this celebrity practice in Beverly Hills. I was making good money, driving nice cars, living in a good area. I was a professor at the university. I was teaching on some of the biggest stages. I was publishing in big journals. I really had everything that I wanted, but I was suffering from team challenges. I wasn't a great communicator. I wasn't a great leader. I didn't have the things that I needed, the non-clinical skills that I needed to succeed. I only had the clinical skills. And I was being sued by a patient. I was being threatened to be sued by a team member. So I was having this really hard time in my life. I wasn't exercising, I was just putting everything into dentistry. And I knew that something needed to change, but I didn't know what that was. So I went on this journey. And because I am a researcher, I went directly to PubMed and started reading research on this. But I was reading research on the science of optimism and the science of overachievers and personal success habits. And I started learning about all this stuff. I ended up making myself a priority finally, which was what it was. I had put everybody in front of me. I had put my patients in front of me, my team in front of me, even my family in front of me. And all of that sounds kind of good, right? Like, oh, I give to everybody else. But when they're telling you about the briefing in the plane and they say, when the oxygen mask drops, what do they tell you, Gary? Put your oxygen mask on first. And I think that's so hard for many of us. It's like we're so good at giving that we forget to give to ourselves. So I went on this journey and my whole life changed. I started exercising. I started learning how to set priorities better, learning how to set boundaries, communicating better expectations with patients. I became a better leader. I ended up starting a dental AI company called Pearl that grew to be several $100 million in valuation. My practice grew. My whole life changed when I made myself a priority. And so that was why I started speaking about this topic, because I went through burnout. I mean, I was ready to just quit dentistry altogether. I didn't, but I was ready to do that. And when I was at my lowest point, there were no resources for dentists. There was no podcasts. There was no downloads. There was no PDFs. There was no CE courses. I would have taken all of that and paid anything, but it didn't exist. And so that was why I started creating that, because once I started talking about this, I realized what a big problem it was in our profession.
Yeah. So I'm an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur, right? So I understand like the pressures of entrepreneurship. I understand everything that you just said. But in dental, it's like, it's a bigger problem, what we're talking about, dentists harming themselves. And it's really scary because it's not just males that do it. Females do it at a similar rate, which tells you it's something about because females don't typically do that at the same rate that males do in pretty much any vertical.
Yeah, dentists are 17 times more likely to commit suicide than a non-dentist. We're twice as likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, and panic disorder than a non-dentist.
So what is it about dentistry? Like, what is because everything you described to me there, where it was like, this is bad, I'm being sued, this thing's happening. I've literally been there and I'm like, oh, I can totally relate to that. But there's other things going on. And I don't know if I've always wondered, is it because dentists work in tight spaces because the mouth is really small? Is it because they're perfectionists, because they like to make everything perfect? And we don't live in that kind of world, right? And you never get there.
It's definitely a combination. So there's 18 different triggers that I have recognized and that I teach in my courses. I call it the dental trigger map, where we go through every trigger so that you know what it is, so that hopefully you can overcome it or try to prevent it. But there's little things like, you know how it is to be an entrepreneur. You know how it is to wear multiple hats. I think what most entrepreneurs don't have to do, most entrepreneurs own a business, but they don't have to be the one working the business and the one owning the business, which is what most single practitioner or even small groups are doing, is, okay, now I put the hat on and I'm going to go prep the crown. Okay, now I take that off and I'm going to be the guy that fixes the chair. Okay, now I put the other hat on and I'm going to go pay the payroll. So, of course, there's that aspect to it. And the other thing is, as an entrepreneur, not in dentistry, rarely do you have people telling you that they hate you every day. This happens almost every day. You see a new patient, you go, hey, Mrs. Jones, nice to meet you. Welcome to our practice. How you doing? Well, I was doing great until I came here. There's a movie called Wreck-It Ralph. Have you ever seen that? Do you have kids? Yeah. So there's a quote in Wreck-It Ralph, and it says something like, it's hard to like your job when no one likes you for doing it. And I was listening to that. My son was watching that, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so true. It's like, you've met and interacted with hundreds of dentists, right? We actually love our job. We are so passionate about it. But it's so hard when people see you as this terrible person just for doing your job.
It's like, I think of other medical verticals, right? It's like, no one likes to go to their heart doctor, but when you go there and they fix your problem, like, you're super happy that they fix your problem. But a lot of times dentists are fixing problems that the patient just doesn't even realize that are even a problem. You know what I mean? Like, they don't realize, we're like, if I go to a doctor, you're thanking them. You're going, oh, thank God. So that's this huge difference. I've actually never had that one tied in with the other one that you gave. And the two hat things is interesting, because when you start a business, everybody kind of starts off as like the solo person in their business, right? And you kind of do everything. But you're right. Like, eventually the goal is really quickly to get out of multiple seats and stop wearing multiple hats. But in dental, I've actually seen the numbers. My friend Perrin, he's done some seminars on this, and I've sat in, I'm a nerd, so I sit there and like listen to him. And he broke down like the amount of dentistry you have to do And then when you go to get out of the chair to make up for that revenue or for that production is almost impossible when you're hiring somebody else. So it's like once you reach a certain pinnacle to get out of the chair, you either have to take a massive step backwards or grow like way bigger. And it gets way more complicated when you go into 2 and 3 practices or guys start doing, you know this. But I think a lot of the listeners don't understand that there's a certain point in dentistry where you either have to take a massive leap backwards or a massive leap forward, or just keep doing dentistry from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, there's other aspects of dentistry that are very specific to dentistry, like working in an environment of fear. What people don't talk, everyone talks about in dentistry, how do we make the patient feel better, which is totally just and virtuous. But what nobody talks about is how does this affect the dentist or the dental team every single day working for decades on patients that are fearful, that are scared. And there is research about this. It's called vicarious trauma. So the longer you work, the more likely you are to experience vicarious trauma. Previously, it was mostly talked about in therapy or certain medical professions, but there are research studies done exactly on dentists. I don't like to call it vicarious trauma because I think it's hard to understand. So I call it dental compassion fatigue.
I love that. The first thing that popped into my head would be police officers. I know police officers have such a hard time because they deal with the worst of the worst people for 10 hours.
Oh, for sure. And I'm sure they have it so hard in that sense. And again, not very many people like police officers until they save you.
Exactly. No one likes a police officer when they give you a ticket. You're like, is there not real criminals out there? And then in the meantime, they're out busting rapists and people hurting children and beating up their spouses and things like that. And that's all they see all day. They don't see the good stuff out there. And then they harm themselves at a high rate too. And it makes so much sense. What you're saying is that you're taking that trauma and you're internalizing it, and then you're hurting yourself. The other thing that I've noticed too is that a lot of dentists deal with this through addiction. And it usually shows up in a couple of different ways. And you could say this about other entrepreneurs and things like that, but I think more so in dentistry is there's a lot of alcohol, gambling, infidelity, and overspending. Hey, we're going to go out and do whatever the next thing is, and it gets people in a lot of trouble. Are those things related?
Yeah, for sure. For sure, they're related. And in my course, I go through all of the research on this. Now, the good news is with the addiction part is that we actually have really high success rates of helping dentists and dental professionals that have gone through addiction. They actually use how they help dentists to help other professions as well, because the success rate is so high. It's like in the 90% of helping addiction in dentistry. So there's actually some good news about that.
90% of dentists that recover, and what's the fix to it? How does that work?
They do it with support groups. And so most people don't know this, but I've learned this because of getting into the mental health world in dentistry, is that most states and maybe even counties have specific support groups for dentists that are going through addiction. So it's not like you're in a support group with the construction worker, the teacher, the doctor, the person, the hairstylist. No, it's all dentists.
So it's that bad. So it's that big of an issue that every single area has dentists that are going through this, and there's a group for them to go talk to people.
But the good news is that it's successful, and we get these people back to practicing. They don't lose their license. They continue, many of them without addiction. So,
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, because if you have an addiction and you're admitting it, that can run into losing your license, losing your livelihood, losing your family, your home. I mean, everything. So that is another reason. I'm in marketing, and it would be normal for me to have an addiction, and I could probably even post about it, and people would be like, "Oh, of course you're a marketer." But practicing dentist, I didn't even think about that.
I mean, there's still a lot of stigma. I get a lot of dentists that contact me and say, I'm interested in taking medication for my depression or for my anxiety or whatever it is. And they're worried about losing their license or losing their, being able to prescribe, like their DEA license, for example, because of that. And there's been some laws that have changed that allow them to not be in jeopardy in order to take medication. So some good things have happened for sure. But there's still people that worry about that. I don't want to take medication because let's say I get sued by a patient, something happens, right? It happens. And I get sued by a patient and then they find out I'm on medication and they could blame it on that. And then, so there's a lot of things to think about and what our colleagues are going through that I think more people need to talk about, not just me.
Yeah. I had never even thought about that. Now, you said there's hope with addiction. Once a dentist says, okay, you know what, I am depressed and I know this isn't going to end well. And I realize that I'm addicted to things because of that. I'm just covering that. What's the success rate of like helping dentists through that?
Very high, actually, very high. I've had about 2,000 people go through my courses from over 30 different countries, and it's very, very high. The funny thing is with burnout is kind of the general term that we use for this because some people may have anxiety or depression or they're tired or whatever. Burnout is the general term that I use, and that's backed up by research. Most of them have all of the dental skills they need. What they don't have are the communication skills. They don't know how to set boundaries, and they don't know how to set expectations. And it's funny is like when you take dentists, we're lifelong learners. Most of us are, fairly intelligent, right? I mean, to get through dental school, you had to be a hard worker, you had to be somewhat intelligent to get through. And so when you give them something structured that is backed by science, usually they kick ass. And so it's really, that's why it's so rewarding for me to do what I do, is because I see huge changes. I see people that come in saying, I'm ready to just close my office and find another job, to thriving, growing their business, going from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, start coaching their kids' soccer team, start taking their spouse out for dates twice a week. They get healthy. They, go to a yoga retreat. They stop drinking alcohol. They have babies. Like, it's been so rewarding to see the big changes. I mean, we even have dentists that have been suicidal that have come to me talking about this, that have gone through my courses. Some of them may have had therapy as well, or medication or whatever. And they thrive. And you go from like the absolute lowest to these thriving dentists. And it's just so rewarding for me to see.
That's so awesome. Now, if somebody's listening to this, because people will listen to this, and so we'll have thousands of people who will tune in, and a lot of them will say, I feel this, right? And I realize now this is why, or this is, I'm starting to understand that my environment and everything about me and all those things are creating this feeling that I have, and there is hope. What's like the first step for a dentist to get better? Like, what is the first thing that you would recommend for a dentist to?
Yeah, I mean, they've already made the first step, which is having the realization. That's the one thing. I mean, a problem understood is a problem half solved. Just having the self-awareness that something has changed for you is definitely the first step. Before they do something like, if they wanted to jump into my course or other people's courses, or, go see a therapist or something, I would say get better physically. So like, make health a priority. It's so silly. It sounds so simple, and it's simple but not easy. Is what most of this is. So after I give lectures, people come up to me and say, hey, I'm going through something like this right now. Can you give me any like quick tips? And I usually ask two questions. I say, do you exercise? And how are you sleeping? And usually the answers are no and shitty. And if you just change that, you could completely change your life by exercising, eating right, and focusing on your sleep. And when I was in my burnout, I didn't realize that I had sleep apnea. I ended up going through orthodontic surgery, going through ortho, going through tongue tie release. It completely changed my life, being able to sleep how I sleep now, because I can show up better. When I show up better, my team performs better. My patients are happier. I make more money. I'm a better family member. My whole life changes. So that's like some quick tips.
Yeah, I know for me, and again, I'm not comparing myself to others out there, but I just know for me, like when I've burnt out and what I was doing and didn't want to do it anymore, wanted to quit, was trying to find every out that I could, I wasn't working out. And it doesn't feel like they're correlated, right? Because it doesn't, when you stop working out or you're not taking care of yourself, it's not like the next day. It's not like coffee. When I stopped drinking coffee that afternoon, I'm like, oh, my head is pounding. And it's like directly correlated with working out. If I go long periods of time without walking and without lifting weights, at least a little bit every single day, like I get very negative. Like mentally, everything's a problem. Everybody is a problem. And then eating, I just do just keep it simple, intermittent fasting. and I eat once a day and I feel amazing when I do it. And then when I start like go on vacation and I start eating multiple times a day and not the best food, like I feel again, I get very negative. I don't feel good. And such a good thought of eating right. And you can control it. I think that's the biggest thing. You can't control the negativity of dentistry. It's negative. Like go into any dental Facebook group, right? It's going to be negative, and no matter what you do and how many people you help, there's somebody in there that's going to tear you down. And that's because of where they work and how they work, right? And you can't control that, but you can control what you're putting in your body. You can control your sleep. You can control how often you're working out and those kind of things. So that's amazing. If someone wants to reach out to you and either learn about your courses or learn more about what you're doing, that's the best way to get in contact with you.
Yeah, so my Instagram is a great place. It's just Dr. Kyle Stanley, Dr. Kyle Stanley. I also have my personal website too, which is Dr. Kyle Stanley, so Dr. Kyle Stanley. And then for my courses and all that, it's linked on my personal website, but you can also just go to lightsidedentistry.com. So that has all of my mini courses, my more signature courses, my in-person courses, all that stuff is on there.
Awesome. Great job today. This is great and exactly what I was looking for. I knew you'd have the answers, and I really appreciate you and what you're doing and just having a good attitude and being positive about things. It makes a big difference.
Thanks for having me.